he could, bringing her books, telling her stories of the school that awaited her. They walked the forest paths, plucked guavas, raced the goats, moments of light stolen from the looming dark. Each time they parted, Adanna felt the ache of fear. Would this? The rains had returned, washing the red earth clean and filling the streams until they ran fast and cold. With them came the approach of a new school term, the very one in which Adanna was meant to leave for the prestigious boarding school. The scholarship letter, folded neatly and tucked in her father's chest box, felt like a key to another life. Yet it lay there, unopened, as though waiting for permission from the gods. Papa Obi stared at that letter often. It gave him pride to know his daughter's name was written there, but it also filled him with unease. For every time he thought of sending her off to school, he remembered the dibia's staff striking the ground, and the warning that her life was tethered to the sun of the shrine. Still, he could not bring himself to surrender. He whispered prayers to the ancestors at night, begging for a sign, for a way out of this knot. But the dibia was not a man to be delayed for long. One afternoon, as the rain clouds gathered, he came again to their compound, his son standing at his side. The boy's eyes roved greedily over Adanna as she carried firewood into the kitchen. The dibia spoke sternly, his voice rolling like thunder. The time of waiting had ended. The girl must be prepared for marriage. Delay, he warned, could bring death back to her doorstep. Agnes's heart pounded. She begged him to allow more time, her voice trembling, her eyes wet. But the dibia's gaze was hard, his patience thin. When he left, the air in the compound remained heavy, as though a curse had been laid across the threshold. Adanna withdrew into silence. She longed to run, to escape the weight pressing down on her, but her body stayed rooted to the soil of her father's land. Only in Solomon's presence did she find relief. He continued to visit, sometimes under the excuse of errands for his mother's boutique, sometimes only to see her. Together they found refuge in simple joys. They gathered snails after the rain, their laughter ringing through the forest as the creatures hid beneath leaves. They crafted little boats from palm fronds and set them afloat on the swollen stream, watching them drift like dreams toward the unknown. At twilight, they sat by the Udala tree, sharing groundnuts and stories. Solomon spoke of cities he had visited with his mother, places where cars filled the streets, where schools had libraries taller than their village houses. Adanna listened, her eyes wide, her heart aching with longing. Each visit wove them closer together, though neither dared to speak the full truth of their feelings. For Adanna, Solomon was hope itself, proof that she could be more than what the dibia declared. Yet each time she returned home, her mother's worried glances and her father's brooding silence reminded her of the prophecy that chained her. The days quickened, rushing toward the term's beginning. Each tick of time felt like a duel, between the world promised by her scholarship and the dark path of the dibia's shrine. Even the villagers began to murmur louder. Some urged her father to send her to school, declaring that her success would bring honor to them all. Others hissed that disobedience to the dibia would invite death upon the family. Adanna felt torn, her heart pulled in two directions. At night she lay awake, hearing the rain drum on the roof, whispering into the dark. She wished for freedom, wished for love, wished for life. But in her chest burned the question that would not leave her. Could she outrun fate, or would fate always find her? The Udala tree, strong and silent, stood watch. It knew the storms had only begun. The weeks crept closer to the school term, and with each passing day, the tension in Adanna's household grew heavier. Even the chickens seemed quieter, the compound swallowed by an uneasy hush. It was on the eve of a four-market day that the dibia returned, this time not with calm words but with thunder in his eyes. He came with his son, who walked with the swagger of one certain of ownership. They sat beneath the Udala tree in the compound, as Papa Obis and Agnes came forward to greet them. The dibia struck the earth 3 times with his staff before he spoke. "The time of patience has ended," he declared. "Your daughter was spared by the gods through my hands. Her breath is not her own, it belongs to the covenant. Before the next moon rises, she must come to my household as wife to my son. If you delay, do not say you were not warned when the spirit children reclaim her." His words fell like stones into the air. Agnes bowed her head, trembling, while Papa Obi sat stiff, anger tightening his jaw. He wanted to shout, to send the man away, but he knew the weight of tradition was not easily broken. He forced his voice steady and begged for more time, speaking of school and the girl's youth, but the dibia's face darkened. "Do not provoke the spirits," he warned, rising with his staff. "You cannot cheat fate. If you do not prepare her for marriage, then prepare her grave." With that he left, his son casting one last greedy glance at Adanna before following behind. That night, the compound was restless. Agnes wept softly, her heart torn in two. Papa Obi sat in silence, staring at the glowing embers of the cooking fire, his mind burning with questions he dared not voice. And Adanna, she lay awake on her raffia mat, staring at the roof, tears hot on her cheeks. She had never felt so trapped. The scholarship letter that once made her heart sore now mocked her, a promise of a world that seemed too far to reach. Yet even in her despair, Solomon's face returned to her mind. She remembered his voice urging her to dream, his hands steadying her when she stumbled, his laughter lifting her heart. She clung to those memories like lifelines, whispering his name into the dark. The following days blurred. Adanna moved like a shadow in her own home, torn between obedience and hope. Solomon visited whenever he could, bringing her books, telling her stories of the school that awaited her. They walked the forest paths, plucked guavas, raced the goats, moments of light stolen from the looming dark. Each time they parted, Adanna felt the ache of fear. Would this be the last time? The village soon hummed with talk. Some said the dibia had given an ultimatum. Others swore they had seen his son at the market buying cloth, as though preparing for a wedding feast. The whispers reached Adanna's ears and made her stomach twist. When the scholarship term finally arrived, the decision could no longer be delayed. The school expected her presence, the dibia expected her submission. Two futures stood before her, and the weight of both threatened to crush her family. On the morning of her departure, Papa Obi's rose before dawn. He went to the shrine of the ancestors and poured libations, whispering fiercely into the clay earth. "Protect my child. Let her live, let her rise, even if it means I must stand against the will of men." As the sun rose, the compound came alive. Agnes packed Adanna's clothes with trembling hands, torn between joy and fear. Adanna herself dressed slowly, her heart thundering in her chest. She knew stepping onto the school path meant stepping away from the dibia's shadow, perhaps forever, or perhaps into even greater danger. And beneath the Udala tree, where the dibia had once struck his staff, the air hung heavy, as though the spirits themselves were watching, waiting to see what choice would be made. The morning Adanna was to leave for school dawned cool and heavy with mist. The roosters crowed, and the village stirred, but in her father's compound, the air was charged with something deeper than ordinary movement. Papa Obi's walked with unusual stiffness, his head held high, his face set like stone. He had made his decision. Whatever curse the dibia threatened, whatever whispers the villagers spread, he would see his daughter take her place at that school. She was his golden child, the promise of everything he had labored for. If danger was to come, let it come upon him, not her. When the sun finally broke through the mist, a familiar sound stirred outside the gate, the rumble of a car engine. Solomon had come with his mother to escort Adanna. The woman stepped out first, elegant in her lace blouse, gold glinting at her wrists. She embraced Agnes warmly and smiled at Adanna. "Your place is waiting, my dear. Do not look back." Adanna's eyes burned with tears. She glanced once at the Udala tree in the compound, its branches spreading wide as though trying to shield her. She thought of the dibia's warning, of the staff striking the earth, of the greedy eyes of the son who wanted her. For a brief moment, her legs trembled. But then she saw Solomon's face, calm and encouraging, his hands subtly reaching for hers. Strength welled within her like a new river. They climbed into the car. The engine roared, and with it came the sound of 1,000 unspoken prayers. Agnes stood by the gate, her wrapper tied tightly around her chest, tears running silently down her cheeks. Papa Obi's placed his hand on her shoulder, steady but firm. "She must go," he said quietly. "Let tomorrow's battles come tomorrow. Today she goes." The car rolled forward, past the compound, past the shrines, past the murmuring villagers who stopped to watch. Some shook their heads, muttering that the family had defied the spirits and would pay dearly. Others smiled faintly, proud that one of their own had reached so high. Adanna sat pressed against the window, her eyes drinking in every sight as though she were leaving one world for another. Fields blurred by, goats scattered, children waved. And all the while, her heart beat with both fear and wonder. She was leaving. She was actually leaving. When they finally arrived at the school, Adanna felt as though she had stepped into another realm. The gates towered above her, painted white, with the crest of the school gleaming like sunlight. Inside were wide lawns, tall buildings with red roofs, and students in crisp uniforms moving like a tide of possibility. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the prophecy of the dibia felt small compared to the vastness of this place. She could almost believe that the spirits had been wrong, that her life could be written in her own hand. That night, lying in her new dormitory, she closed her eyes and listened to the unfamiliar hum of boarding life. The dibia's shadow still lingered in her mind, whispering warnings, but stronger still was the echo of her father's voice. Let tomorrow's battles come tomorrow. And so, beneath the unseen gaze of the spirits and the patient branches of the Udala tree far away, Adanna's new life began. The first weeks at the new school were like walking into a dream. Adanna wore her crisp uniform with quiet pride, the navy blue skirt brushing her knees, the white blouse shining against her dark skin. She learned to march in the morning assembly, to file into classrooms with other girls and boys, whose voices rang with confidence. In class she excelled. Her mind soaked up English and mathematics like thirsty soil drinking the rain. Teachers soon noticed the brilliance of the village girl who had arrived on scholarship, and they praised her openly. For the first time in her life, Adanna felt she was not defined by fainting spells or whispered curses, but by the sharpness of her mind. Solomon was her constant anchor. Though they were in separate classes, he found ways to see her, carrying her books between periods, walking her to the refectory, sharing roasted groundnuts under the mango tree by the dormitory. They laughed over small things, sometimes racing each other across the playing field, sometimes sitting quietly with a book between them, reading side by side. It was an innocence that bloomed into something deeper, though neither dared call it love. Yet even in this garden of newness, the shadow followed. The first sign came one cold harmattan morning. As the bell rang for assembly, Adanna's knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed on the dusty ground. Students gasped. Teachers rushed to her side. When she awoke minutes later, she found herself in the sick bay, the nurse frowning. "It is exhaustion," the woman said, but Adanna felt the familiar chill of the unseen pressing against her. That night, she dreamed. She saw the dibia's son standing at the edge of the Udala tree, his hand outstretched. Behind him, the dibia's staff struck the earth again and again, each thud echoing into her bones. She woke with a scream, her roommates stirring in fright. Days passed, but the strangeness did not leave. Sometimes she would feel a sudden heaviness in her chest, as though unseen hands were squeezing the life from her. Other times, she would hear whispers in the rustle of leaves, calling her name, reminding her of the covenant she had not fulfilled. Solomon noticed the shadows in her eyes. One evening, as they sat together by the sports field, he said softly, "You look as if you are carrying a burden too heavy for one person. If you ever wish to share it, I am here." Adanna smiled faintly but said nothing. How could she tell him of the prophecy, of the dibia's threats, of the promise that her life belonged to another? She feared that once spoken aloud, the curse would wrap itself tighter around her. Meanwhile, news traveled back to the village. The dibia had grown restless, declaring that the family had defied the spirits. Rumors spread that his son had begun visiting other compounds, boasting that Adanna would soon be his wife regardless of where she ran. Some villagers whispered that strange misfortunes would follow the Obi's household for their disobedience. In the quiet of the dormitory, under the hum of lantern light, Adanna lay awake. The school was everything she had dreamed of, and yet, she could not shake the feeling that the dibia's eyes still followed her, even here. Each day brought triumph in her studies, joy in her secret companionship with Solomon, and yet also dread, a sense that the covenant was counting down, like footsteps approaching in the dark. The Udala tree stood far away in her father's compound, but in her heart, it loomed taller than ever, its branches carrying the weight of fate. The rainy season had thinned into dry winds again. At school, Adanna's days grew brighter. She had won first position in her class, and the principal had called her name at assembly, praising her brilliance before the entire school. Pride swelled in her chest, but so too did fear. For every triumph, a whisper followed. "You do not belong here. Your life was already spoken for." It was on an ordinary Tuesday morning that the storm returned. The school compound buzzed as students hurried to class, laughter and chatter filling the air. At the gate, the guards, clad in khaki uniforms, noticed a stranger approaching, a lanky young man with a rough wrapper tied about his waist and a stubborn fire in his eyes. It was the dibia's son. He demanded to be let in, his voice sharp, his tone entitled. "I have come for my wife," he declared. "Her name is Adanna. She belongs to me." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Such language was strange in this place, where girls wore neat uniforms and spoke of books and future dreams. The man's presence was out of place, like a shadow in the sun. "We don't know you," one guard replied firmly. "This is a school. No one belongs to you here." But the dibia's son refused to move. His words grew louder, drawing the attention of passing students who gathered in small clusters, whispering. Some recognized Adanna's name, their eyes widening with curiosity and suspicion. The guards stood their ground. "You will not enter," they said, their voices like stone. "If you cause trouble, we will call the police." For a moment, the dibia's son glared, his pride wounded. He muttered something under his breath, words that felt more like curses than speech, then turned sharply and walked away, his footsteps kicking up the dust. But his shadow lingered long after he disappeared down the road. Inside the school, the whispers spread quickly. By afternoon, students were nudging Adanna, asking who the strange man was who had called her his wife. Her face burned with shame. The walls of her safe world suddenly felt thinner, fragile, as if the dibia's reach could pierce even these gates. That night, as she lay in her bunk, the dreams returned. She saw the dibia's son again, his hand reaching, his voice calling her name in a tone that was neither love nor kindness but possession. She awoke trembling, sweat clinging to her skin. Solomon noticed her unease the next day. He walked beside her quietly, his presence steady. "Whoever that boy was," he said gently, "he has no power here. Do not forget that. This place, your books, your future, it belongs to you." Adanna wanted to believe him. She clung to his words the way a drowning soul clings to a floating log. But deep inside, she knew the dibia's son would not stop. His body had been turned away at the gates, yes, but his shadow was already inside, lurking in her dreams, haunting her spirit. And as the harmattan winds howled through the dormitory windows, Adanna realized that her fight was only beginning.